Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fireside Chicago, where we host fireside chats with prominent leaders from Chicago's business community, live on Zoom with Q&A every Tuesday and Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. You can also check us out on YouTube if you can't make any of the live shows. We have a YouTube channel, just YouTube Fireside Chicago. We're going to be turning all of the shows once we hit 20 into a podcast, and we're going to be putting this podcast on anywhere you'll be able to find podcasts. So Apple or Spotify, there's a bunch of other ones that are aggregated out there. So make sure that you subscribe to those. Follow us on LinkedIn for updates there, of course. Today on the show, we have Ablorde Ashigbi. Ablorde is the founder and CEO of 4Degrees. I've gotten to know Ablorde over the last several weeks or so. We've had some really cool conversations. 4Degrees is getting a lot of love in the Chicago tech community. They raised a round of capital. They got into the Techstars program back in 2017. We're going to be talking about this Google Accelerator that they were just accepted into. There's a lot of things going on 4Degrees in 2020. Super exciting. Ablorde's background, he's a former consultant at Bain & Company turned venture capital senior associate at Pritzker Group Venture Capital here in Chicago. Turned entrepreneur. 4Degrees is a Chicago-based technology company applying machine learning intelligence to help teams in relationship-driven industries. Think consulting, venture capital, services-based industries. We're going to get to that in a second. Manage their professional networks. I've been a big proponent of what we call social selling. My firm, my sales team, adheres to social selling sales techniques. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation with Ablorde. So if you're a business owner in business development, sales, marketing, even if you're a job seeker looking for a job, make sure you check out this conversation. Ablorde, thank you so much for carving out the time. It's great to see you.
Yeah, no, really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I was looking forward to this. So just for folks that hasn't seen any of the previous interviews that you've done, hasn't heard of 4Degrees before, why don't we get into your background real quick, and then I'll ask you some questions about 4Degrees, and we'll get into the conversation.
Yeah. So quickly on me, I think you actually summarized it pretty well. So before building 4Degrees, I spent my career in what I would describe as relationship-driven industries. So certainly venture capital, which was the industry I was in right before this, is one of those. So investing in early stage companies. And then even before that in consulting at Bain & Company. The thing that underpinned or was true about both of those industries were that, the relationship network that surrounded the firm that each one of the individual participants had was a key determinant of the success of those organizations. So in venture, sourcing deals, diligencing them, and then once you made an investment, helping those companies grow was fundamentally about the network of the team and how you could use that to help all those objectives occur. And then in consulting, these, typically multi-million-dollar kind of projects that were being sold were usually off of the back of years worth of engagement and working with these Fortune 500 executives and trying to understand their problems and challenges and building a real relationship with them. And the challenge, I guess, was true across both, were that there weren't really systems that understood that to be true about the way people operated. And so we were always kind of doing this in a combination of sticky notes and Evernote notes, trying to jam them into systems like Salesforce. We decided there was an opportunity to build a product we wished we had, in short. And so that certainly has been kind of the driving force behind kind of the business that we've built today. And as we think longer term, we do think there's an opportunity to fundamentally reshape the way all professionals manage the relationships that matter to their businesses and to their kind of professional journeys as well. So a very quick version of at least my professional background, and then from a personal level. So I'm the son of two West African immigrants, landed here in the US and have kind of bounced around ever since. And so I guess I get the entrepreneurial streak of kind of jumping into the new and unknown and searching something better, in addition to the work ethic and the like from that background.
I love it. And I love your product. I know there's a need and a problem. I'm living it every day. And when I think of, a big consulting contract at Bain & Company, or a big audit contract for a company that's going to IPO from Deloitte or one of the big four accounting firms, those are big dollars. And what it comes down to is trust and confidence with the people that are having the conversation about engaging with some of those firms to the buyer, right? And, I've been a salesperson my entire career. I remember cold calling, showing up cold at businesses with business cards and dropping that off. And like, that's how I found my first deals. And, we're going on, I've been in sales ever since the, early 2000s. As technology has progressed and we're in the day and age of LinkedIn and social media and Google and Yelp, I think, the buyer's persona of what buyers do and how they make decisions has changed drastically. So on one sense, I've seen, trust be developed through like an online persona in some cases, but for, I own a recruiting consulting firm. We're a relationship driven industry. My buyers aren't Googling, recruiters, and we're getting our leads that way. But if I'm a consulting firm, I got to figure out, how do I get relationship capital with the right people and build that trust and confidence over time? How do I identify those people? What can I offer these people to get my foot in the door? I mean, it's such an interesting topic for me. This isn't about me, but when you were in consulting and venture capital, I mean, what's the state of the state today? What did you see in order for that light bulb moment to go off that there's a need here?
Yeah, I mean, the state of the state. Actually, I really like the expression. I don't know if I've ever heard that one before. So what really the common way people tried to do this work was in Excel spreadsheets. And it's a shame. Or if they didn't use Excel spreadsheets, in some cases they go and hire like a custom like engineering or like development firm to try to build something that would ultimately help them do this specific piece of the job better. And the reason for that is that there weren't really products that understood just how important these relationships were, or that essentially each person had a slightly different workflow that they thought through their own relationship connectivity and kind of nurturing with. And so because of that, either led to trying to jam this into what I would describe as like very transaction-oriented systems. So Salesforce being the common example of this. And Salesforce is a great system. Like, don't get me wrong. If you are an enterprise sales manager at a large company, I can't think of a better kind of more adaptable solution, providing you are willing to spend the money, than Salesforce. The challenge is that Salesforce is built for a very clear sales process, like the word sales is in the name. And most relationships that actually matter to a business don't always directly result in a transaction, right? So Tim, you and I got introduced. The folks who've known us and who are not sales prospects for me or you, that doesn't make sense for me to put them in a pipeline. But at the same time, I would love to be kind of ensuring that I'm engaging with those folks and ensuring that those relationships get built. And so it's really challenging to manage, to manage those sorts of long-term, long-standing relationships that don't necessarily result in a transaction in a sales-based system. And so that's why people ultimately end up doing a lot of this in these hyper-flexible, but also hyper-manual solutions like Excel and Airtable. And so seeing that happen consistently over and over again in both those domains is what made the light bulb go off that, hey, there's actually real pain here. And if we were to solve for that pain, there's a real opportunity to build an interesting company.
I mean, I can speak to it from both sides. So I get cold calls and cold emails all the time as a business owner. And, when I'm busy, I go to my email and I find out which are the sales emails and I check the box and I hit delete on all of them. And then I go to my tasks. Then I go to my day. But if I get an email from you and you're like, hey man, I'm using this cool software tool, or you got to try this outsourced accounting firm. My accountant's awesome. Can you take a 10-minute call with he or she? I'd be like, of course, I trust you. You're wicked smart. And I'm sure you surround yourself with great people, and I'm going to take that call. And I think that's how commerce is happening, to your point, in certain industries, where I think a lot of sales managers, to your point, depending on your product or service, are running into brick walls because there's just a lot of noise out there from a sales standpoint. Makes a lot of sense. We're spending a lot of time on social selling ourselves in my business, and I see the need here for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe to riff off that for a moment, I think there are a lot of firms in a lot of these industries who roughly make the same claims, right? If you were to look at the marketing website or the collateral they're sending you or the messaging they're putting into their emails, they more or less say the same things. And so as a buyer who's And ultimately technology, I think, has played a negative role in this. It's made it really easy for people to scale that message. And so as a result, put a lot of those like very similar sounding messages in your inbox that makes it really difficult to parse, what's real, what's fake, what's spam, like where should I actually be spending my time and attention. And so to the kind of point you were making at the very beginning, a lot of these decisions ultimately become very trust-based. Can I use kind of this filter of who my network recommends and believes in and trusts as a way of kind of navigating through the noise and identifying which conversations, which people, which companies are ones that I should ultimately be doing business with. And so I see kind of this kind of whole like mission of helping people manage relationships and do a better job of building those relationships over time is helping people kind of get through a version of this trust crisis.
So my sales process, okay, we'll just use me as an example. And I want you to maybe speak to like some of the features and the tools and like some of the variables, I guess is probably the best term for it, that indicate that a person is high value relationship capital for what I'm trying to achieve. So, we service business owners and HR leaders, right? So those are my buyers. Mm-hmm. Now, if I send an email to a business owner and HR leader, they're not going to read it. So our sales process is to find what we call strategic partners that service that same buyer and business owners and complementary services that are non-competitive. So accountants serve business owners, attorneys serve business owners, payroll providers serve HR leaders, benefits providers serve HR leaders, and build really good relationships with these individuals and say, what can I provide of value to these people? And if that's valuable, they'll probably reciprocate that with an introduction at some point down the road. So what we spend a lot of time on is, okay, how do I find these people? What's good and what's a good contact? Do I have any warm introductions to the strategic partners to start? Do I have any warm introductions to the buyers to get there quicker? And I mean, man, it gets sloppy. We're doing it in spreadsheets all the time. Maybe talk about the tool itself and some of the algorithms and how the machine learning element comes in to maybe kind of shorten that or make that process more efficient for your customers.
Yeah, you named a bunch of different elements there that I think that I can definitely speak to. So the first is this idea of like warm introductions, right? Which goes back to this whole idea that in some sense, like a warm introduction is like a form of transfer trust. If your network is able to kind of vouch for you and vouch for the other party, then it's easier to go and have that conversation. And so our product plugs into email and calendar and a bunch of other communication channels. And we use that to get an understanding of who your team is kind of connected to and communicating with. And so as a result, if a teammate of yours knows someone who either A, is at the specific business owner's company that you're trying to get to, or the strategic partner, B, used to work there, or C, maybe is invested in the company or something similar, we're trying to pick all that up and surface it to you. So that way you can use those as paths to get to that person and go and have that conversation. So that's kind of angle number one, or like conversation path number one. Number two is, you mentioned, hey, you got this list of these strategic partners who could be great kind of referral paths into specific businesses. Some of whom you're going to probably make sure you're touching base with them regularly, that you're building up that relationship over time. And so we actually provide a few different tools you can use to drive forward on that path. Number one is actually just setting up these recurring cadences of interaction. So you can say, hey, I want to make sure I touch base with this person once every 6 months, or this person once every 3 months. Our product, because it's plugged into email and calendar, will detect if you are essentially overdue to reconnect with that person based on that cadence and give you a quick ping. And so it helps you save time on needing to track, hey, when was the last time I spoke to that person again? Similarly, we actually go and search the world for news and information about the people and the companies in your network. So that means if that service provider, or if that referral source, or maybe even the business owner themselves has shown up in the news, they've published content, they've changed jobs, if you're flying to their city, in the case where that referral source is like an investor or something similar, if they've done a new deal recently, we're trying to pick all of those up and surface it to you. And that really has two purposes. The first is it actually helps you build on the relationship directly and in a pretty authentic way. It allows you to say, like, hey, I saw this, congrats, or hey, I heard about that, that's awesome. But then secondly, in some of those cases, that actually may be related specifically to a business owner that you're trying to get in front of. So in the case of an investor, if they've made a new investment in a company, chances are that company now has capital to start to scale and deploy. And in your case, that probably means they're going to go higher. And so knowing that there's a path and that relationship has been built there allows you to kind of use that as a signal to start to re-engage in that way. So a couple of different examples of how kind of the product itself starts to help you execute on some of those practices.
Yeah, I feel like, it went from Rolodexes, which are very manual, and you have to have a lot of pens for that over time, to, the traditional CRM. And, you mentioned some things like Salesforce is getting a little bit more intuitive and like tying it to other areas of the business. That's super valuable, for other departments and things like that. But, really it's just as good as the data that's being put into it. And it's very much a documentation tool. That's kind of a pain in the butt for salespeople that want to be out talking to people a lot of the time. It's almost that like intuitive, AI, machine learning, forward thinking CRM is what you guys are trying to do. We had Elliot Garms on the show last week of Human Predictions, and his platform gives predictive indicators for software talent on if who's the most likely to be looking for a job. And I think, if you really kind of forecast this whole space out 20 years, 50 years or whatever, there's probably going to be a time where, if I'm a buyer of a service, I just got to kind of like click a button, or maybe something's telling me that I'm about to be a buyer of a service that's going to, hit those potential vendors and force rank them on the best based on the needs that I have and all this kind of stuff. It's very wild to kind of think about based on where we're at today. But if you think about where we came from, we're probably not far off. Being somebody that's founded a machine learning based company, how do you see the future of the sales space in general and the relationship capital space in a professional sense?
Yeah, I mean, my ingoing hypothesis around all of this is that I think technology will become better and better about giving people like signals and identification points. So to what Elliot's doing in Human Predictions, and there are even some companies in the sales space that will try to do some kind of essentially predictive intent about whether a company may be in the midst of a searching process. And so I think you'll see more and more sophisticated versions of that technology. I do think, though, that there's going to always be like a layer of authenticity that's going to be very hard to either fake or get rid of. And so I think as computers, as machine learning becomes better and better about getting rid of a lot of the search, getting rid of a lot of the manual data entry, the things that will differentiate one salesperson from another, one relationship-driven professional from another, will be their capacity to build relationship with people. I think that is the thing that artificial intelligence, at least not in any of the near term, will be able to replicate about the human experience. And so I think what will be differentiating for people is the capacity that they have to have conversations like these, and ideally walk away with the other person saying, I want to do business with that person and that company because of what they stand for and how they treated me.
How do you put, or how do you view putting, maybe like a KPI or a value on relationship capital? So for example, we have folks that introduce us to a lot of our customers over time. They're our best referral partners. There's a lot of trust built up. There's hours and hours and hours spent, lunches, drinks, breakfasts, and Zooms of relationship capital that are spent, versus maybe something that's not as valuable right now, but could be, versus I shouldn't be spending my time there kind of thing. Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
I believe so. So I'll take a shot at it. So I do think within a business, there are probably specific places where you can expect relationship capital to ultimately translate into direct business value. In fact, we actually wrote a blog post on this for some of our customers, which is like the hidden ROI of like relationship intelligence. And so some of the things that we pointed to there, maybe in a business like yours, would be, okay, if I'm spending all these time with these strategic partners, I expect those strategic partners to, over time, generate, referrals. And so those referrals, maybe you're tracking it in terms of number of referrals, maybe it's value referrals, what have you, but that's one path you could go have that conversation. A second, as a recruiting firm, you're probably spending a fair bit of time like engaging with like great candidates, right? And so one of the conversations you could be having around this is, all right, what's the essentially the scale of our candidate pool, but also like how, like maybe what's even like the response rate? Like if we built a good relationship with these people, are they actually like interested in responding to our emails when we've sent them opportunities that have come their way, even if it's not the right fit at that time? And so there are a bunch of these kind of specific things, I think, depending on the business, you can use to directly drive value. In general, though, I probably am a believer in essentially building relationships without direct expectation of return. And I tend to find that in some cases, like those relationships where it's unclear exactly how this person's going to add value to life, but you think it's worth engaging with them anyway, because, relationships, I think, are ultimately one of the things that make us human, ultimately end up resulting in a return. To that end, I'll actually give you a quick story. So when we went through Techstars, one of the things in Techstars that they kind of have as essentially part of every program is this piece called Mentor Madness, where first month you end up meeting with anywhere between like 50 and like 80 people who are like experts in different domains, or who have like specific, or maybe are investors, or specific areas of focus. And so I remember like having a meeting with someone where it wasn't like immediately clear to me like why they were on our slate or why they were on our calendar. But you sit down and you take the meeting, and it turned out that that person's kid was in a soccer league with the CIO of a group, who was then talking to him at a soccer game about exactly what it was that we were building and like the challenges he was facing around this. He made an introduction to the person like the next week, and they became our biggest customer, right? And so came into that meeting, no expectation of like anything specific happening, but ended up having real value for us as a company. And so I think that's, a specific example of how, relationship building without expectation of return oftentimes does generate real return.
That's great. That's great. I have a lot of examples of that too. And I take every meeting, and as a business that's 2 years in with a small sales team, we would hope that other people have that mentality as well, and take that meeting and show that we could provide value over time. But I think, you hit on a point even with your anecdote where it's like, you don't know going into that what that potential outcome might be. But even your platform is saying there might be a way to at least kind of give you some indication that there might be value there. Or you might say, we talked about this in a previous conversation, but maybe I'm targeting these 25 companies kind of thing. And, maybe through the platform, there's a way to understand if that person, or, this list of 100 people, know people at those 25 companies.
Yeah. I mean, if there's some sort of like relationship with that person in that company, or if there's news about them or things along those lines, those are all kind of ways that our product tries to help essentially make that network actionable for you. At the same time, to your point, like sometimes you take the meeting and the exact outcome isn't clear, but you end up getting somewhere anyway. And even if you don't, also fine, right?
I love it. You've been in, so raised in Texas, went to college in Boston, but you've been in Chicago for some time with Pritzker Group Venture Capital. You started and founded and headquarters of your companies here in Chicago. So you've been part of the Chicago tech scene on the venture capital side, and now as an early stage founder side. What's your view of the Chicago tech scene? I know you spent some time on the West Coast, maybe as it relates to other coasts, and your general characterization of what the ecosystem looks like today.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see Chicago's tech ecosystem as one that's on the rise, right? And I think it's on the rise I think first, Chicago has a bunch of fundamentals that make it a great place to build a technology company, or at least can. The first is you do have it being a magnet for talent, right? Which I imagine is like key for your business. But a bunch of the Midwestern universities and ones that are nearby all end up having a lot of very smart, very talented folks, whether they're going off in the business departments of organizations or engineers. And so Chicago has a lot of the talent you would need to go build a great company. The second is, at least relative to like since Silicon Valley or New York or Los Angeles, is that it's relatively affordable to build a company here and to have a life here. And so that means that you can take what is a relatively limited amount of capital and generally scale a business off of that capital in a way that would be far more difficult to do if you were in Silicon Valley and your rents were 3 or 4 times and the cost of team members was significantly higher. The third is, particularly if you're a B2B company, I think the sheer number of Fortune 500 companies that are located nearby here make it easy to have proximity to customers or people who have kind of a deep, intimate understanding of customer problems. And so I think Chicago has an advantage over most places where they don't have that same level of proximity to either those specific companies or the kinds of information that comes out of them. And so a bunch of reasons why I think Chicago has a real shot at being, a preeminent tech ecosystem over time. I think one of the reasons why Chicago has kind of been on the rise in my mind is that I think more capital has started to come to the area as well. So certainly kind of Pritzker Group has been one of the founding institutions and I guess the foundational ones. But you're seeing a lot more funds that are popping up at the pre-seed and seed and to some extent Series A level as well. And so I think that allows for companies to build kind of those relationships in the early days and be able to get enough capital to get out the door and start to build something pretty special pretty quickly here. That said, I mean, if you were to compare us to Silicon Valley, if you were to compare us to New York, if you were to compare us to Los Angeles, the amount of capital and particularly maybe the risk-taking lens of that capital is less here than it is in other places. I think you'd find that the capability of two people and an idea to go raise capital if you lived in San Francisco is very different than that of here in Chicago. And so it's my hope over time that you see more and more kind of risk-taking early pools of capital be here. But I do think Chicago is, moving in the right direction on those spectrums, and ideally with more kind of Cameos and Grubhubs and some SSS and the like, you'll get more and more companies and people who are able to go spend that capital that way.
Let's touch on that real quick. So I've been in the tech space for 4 years. Our firm does a lot of, Series A or Series B hiring ramps. And I'm getting kind of both sides of the story where some of our clients, most of their capital came from Chicago, got them off the ground. Second or third rounds of capital came from Chicago, got them off the ground. And then some, really kind of depending on what the product was, a lot of like B2C, consumer based, were like, we had a really tough time finding capital in Chicago. You go out to the coast, they're throwing money around, at ideas. What did you see the disparity from your venture capital lens as it related to that? The ability to get deals done on the West Coast versus coming here, if you could elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few different dynamics at play. So one is I do think Chicago probably almost from a mentality standpoint tends to be a town that is a little bit more revenue centric and revenue focused than either of the coasts, and certainly more than the West Coast. And so what I think that leads to is like, if you were an early stage like B2C company, and particularly if you're one that's not like an e-commerce business or one that doesn't like make money off every transaction, then I think you're asking people to take a leap for which like Chicago, at least historically, hasn't had as many investors who are excited about or interested in that leap. And so I can certainly understand if you are a B2C company, and especially one that isn't like a pure e-commerce company, like it's a much harder route to hoe here. There's no question about that. I do think if you are a B2B company here in Chicago, if you are founded by like a serial founder, then like there's a real shot you can raise multiple rounds of capital here. I think if you are a B2B founder who has gotten their first few contracts and is getting, north of 10K of MRR or similar, you can definitely raise money here in Chicago. And I also think Chicago is a city that, because most of the funds are small, it also means that there are very few funds like that will be excited about or have a ton of conviction in like leading on their own. And there are some, don't get me wrong. But it does mean that there tends to be a lot of party rounds together where like a bunch of the funds will do a round at once. And so it does mean that if you're able to get a couple folks interested, that you're probably able to go like raise the capital you need to get the seed round done. But it becomes much harder if you don't get that. There's a little bit of like a bit of momentum around that makes it difficult to either get it done and get it done easily or not get it done at all. And so I think versus the coasts, you see a lot of that challenge, because if you're a B2C company, the coasts certainly have a lot of love for that. It really only takes like one check on the coast to fundamentally change around. And so you just see very different dynamics for that reason, I believe.
Interesting. All right. So we got to get 4Degrees to IPO somewhere around the 2 billion mark. We'll reinvest that back in the Chicago tech scene, and we'll fast forward our growth to catch up with Silicon Valley. For sure.
In the meantime, let's bet on like Logicate and Cameo and the others who are a little bit further along.
That sounds good. Switching gears a little bit, you were in venture capital. You saw a lot of founders, entrepreneurs, things to do right. Maybe mistakes that were happening. I can relate. I was a business coach, waiting out a non-compete in my industry. My background is sales and sales leadership. I was a sales consultant, but I was working with business owners and I saw people doing the right things and the wrong things. So when I started my business, I almost had a leg up. I felt like, how did your experience in venture capital, working with founders, kind of parlay into your experience as a tech founder yourself, as it relates to maybe some of the learnings that you picked up along the way and how you're applying that to 4Degrees?
Yeah, so there's definitely some things I learned from being in venture. no question. So I think one was the importance of kind of attacking a really large opportunity, just because you go through a lot of pain building any business. And so if you're going to do that, you should probably go for the thing that, if it works, has the opportunity to scale very large. The second thing I probably learned was, and it's maybe tactically, learned a lot about how investors think about opportunities, right? Which means it makes it a little bit easier. And I wouldn't say fundraising hasn't been easy for us, but it made it a little bit easier to go in the rooms and have the sorts of conversations that we found to be valuable and ultimately get those things done. And it has certainly at least allowed us to have, pattern recognition is the wrong word, but be able to recognize that there are like certain problems or certain like failure modes that pop up if you go down certain paths. And so those things have definitely been helpful. There's two caveats I would make to those statements though. So caveat number one is, now if you're familiar with Daniel Kahneman and this idea like thinking fast and slow, which is this tome that he's written about a bunch of the mental biases and misjudgments that we have. And one of the things he describes is like, look, I've basically spent my career studying this problem or studying like these mental biases. I have built like a large library of all of them, but I fall prey to every single one. So like there's a very big difference between kind of intellectually understanding that these challenges may exist and then like not making those mistakes. And I think we've avoided some, but there are plenty that we've probably fallen into along the way. And then the second thing I'd say is like venture does teach you a lot. There's no question about it. But there are a lot of things that are just like a lot of the hardest stuff aren't things you're going to directly get like value from, or at least you're going to directly understand from venture. So like, what does it feel like? How do you actually go and build a team full of people who have very different skills than you in domains you don't understand? How do you keep people motivated and excited to charge forward? How do you get rid of people when something isn't working out? Like the really hard, like human problems. And yes, if you are like a partner at a venture fund, like you have human problems too that you need to consider, but I'd argue that they're of a slightly like different feel and I don't know, at slightly different stakes, so to speak. And so those are the things that I've found to be, I think those are the hardest things about building a company. And I ultimately don't think that, at least if you're a junior person at a venture fund, that you get a ton of exposure to how to solve for this.
I mean, you could read every book, you could ask every question, you could get all the corporate experiences in the world. You'd be starting a company at like 85 years old, if you had the mindset of like, I can't be a risk taker. I got to have like the playbook ready to go before I start. On the flip side, I think, I would encourage anybody that has any goal or dream, even if it's as scary as starting a business, to like read books, Google YouTube videos, like listen to podcasts like this, hear from people that have done it before. And one, it becomes less scary to do it. I'm sure being around other founders that has done this before is like, hey, maybe I could do this too. And same thing for me. But also like picking up little nuggets along the way has at least steered me away from the wrong direction and then sometimes in the right direction. So that's awesome that you had those experiences. Kind of close things out. I want to touch on two other things. Talk to us about the Google Accelerator that you were just accepted to, what that means for 4Degrees, some of the opportunities that presents for you and the team.
Yeah, no, we're really excited to be a part of it. I mean, first, just having the brand and the almost apparatus that is Google behind us is really exciting. Specifically, one of the main things that this program is oriented towards are specific projects around machine learning and artificial intelligence that will help the company kind of drive forward. We've been in a machine learning company from the very beginning, to the point where like our domain name is .ai to kind of be a quick signal of that. And so we get really excited about working with a company that's arguably at the forefront of a lot of the artificial intelligence and machine learning kind of capacities that we see to drive forward on our roadmap in that domain. So we're super excited about that access. In addition, we also get fairly unfettered access to other areas within Google as well. And so looking forward to learning from them from everything about SEO and SEM to other kind of engineering practices that we should be embedding into the company. It's going to be, it's already been awesome. And I have no doubt it's going to be, an incredibly valuable experience for us.
Very cool. Very cool. And I think we're probably catching you at, let's call it chapter 4 of a multi-chapter, 20-chapter book. So I'll look forward to future conversations and see where 4Degrees takes you. 2020 though, 2021, what are some new features or what's next for 4Degrees on the platform that you can speak to today?
Yeah. So one of the things I'll talk about that I'm actually really excited about is this idea that we're calling like shared views. And so to give a little bit of context, so usually today when we kind of install 4Degrees in an organization, they're using it to share their network within your team's four walls, right? So you, Tim, are able to share your network with Ben and other folks at Lucas Shane, for instance, and vice versa, and be able to easily understand connectivity to different folks. However, Lucas James is actually probably a great example of this. There usually are, maybe for lack of a better term, like fellow travelers around an organization. And those might be existing clients of yours, there might be advisors to the company, what have you, who either one, have really strong relationship connectivity of their own that they'd be happy to open up to you, provided it was done in the right way, or two, who you'd like to be able to share pieces of your network with for specific asks. So maybe we were asking you for connections to Procter & Gamble because we were trying to get into kind of their procurement department for there. That's probably something you'd be happy to do for us, but there's not a very easy way of doing it. You probably have to search through 4 or 5 different data sources, and even then you only get your contacts and not your teams. It gets really complex really fast. And so we're basically simplifying that process down to like 3 or 4 clicks on your end to be able to paste that in an email and send it out. And so the opportunity is to take what is this kind of proprietary asset of the team and be able to kind of smartly leverage that in order to build on the relationships that you care about and ultimately help people accomplish things that you care about.
Very cool. I need to check that out. I need to do a demo with the team. I know I'm not like target ideal client profile, but I love the tool. I know there's a huge problem out there. For anyone that's listening to this, we got to support our own. Support the companies in Chicago that are trying to make it happen. If you're listening to this, reach out to Ablorde. Put this social selling to work. Hey, what's your ideal client profile at 4Degrees? Ask him if you can provide any value and help out. This is what he's talking about. This is why this tool is built. And for me personally, just being in sales my entire career and utilizing professional relationship capital, I do feel like this is the future of how commerce is going to be done in a B2B sense, especially for those services businesses, those consulting businesses. You mentioned venture capital. So I do feel like this is the future, and the days of email drip campaigns and robocallers and things like that just won't have the same effect. But Ablorde, until next time, always enjoy chatting. Until next time, if someone wanted to reach out to learn a little bit more about 4Degrees or connect with you individually, where can they find you? Where can they find a little bit more information about 4Degrees?
Sure thing. So first is our website, so 4degrees.ai. Second is my email, so I'm ablorde@4degrees.ai. And then third is, of all the social networks, I'm probably most active either on LinkedIn or Twitter, probably more Twitter than LinkedIn actually. So my Twitter is Ablorde Says, and then my LinkedIn, of course, you can find my name there. So any one of those channels works well for me.
Thank you so much for carving out the time. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.